Hello and welcome to another episode of the Personal Record Podcast. I am your host, Timothy Clark. I'm sure a lot of you out there have noticed the growth in running. New York Road Running races are as big as they've ever been. Rock and roll races are as big as they've ever been. A lot of these smaller events that are trying to mimic what they do are as big as they've ever been. But there is kind of a pushback in the running world with these unsanctioned events. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about them. Some of you might have actually participated in a few of them. But today's guest is Joe DiNoto. Joe is one of the founders of the unsanctioned scene, kind of in general, but specifically in New York City for certain, I'd say. At least you're up there.
We definitely made an impact early on, I think. I'm not sure that if we were the first ones to execute, but I think we were the first ones to get the attention.
I would agree with that. You guys have done a lot for that whole scene. Now, just to give a little bit of background, Joe is the founder of the Orchard Street Runners, or OSR. Mm-hmm. You might see a lot of their runners at a lot of different events. But through OSR, he then became the race director for a number of events, including most notably the OSR 30, which is a 30-mile run around the island of Manhattan. You have most recently the OSR Bread Route Race, which, as I understand, is the compilation of your father had a bread route, and you would go out with him, and you kind of wanted to start a race that mimicked that bread route. Is that correct?
Almost. What I wanted to create was a feeling of being in New York City in the middle of the night, having streets to yourself. So we didn't exactly mimic his route. We just kind of wanted to put competitors in the context of New York City in the middle of the night with empty streets.
That's pretty cool. And then also you have the OSR 10K, which is actually split into a men's race and a women's race. So there's a little bit of caveat to that, which we'll get into later. And then the what used to have the Midnight Half Marathon, which was a very popular event. I've been hearing about that for years, and people loved it. Caitlin Phillips, in fact, who was on this show, said that was one of the funnest events she's ever run in her life.
Yeah, we did it for about 5 years, starting in 2012, and a lot of people miss it, and we definitely miss putting it on. It was definitely a great event, and I think it was the first one to make a real impact in terms of what is this unsanctioned running thing.
So what is this unsanctioned running thing? Why did it come about? Why is it there, in your opinion, and what has been your experience been in the unsanctioned world?
That's a really good question. I think the unsanctioned running thing kind of happened because, for me anyway, in 2008, I was laid off from my career as an architect. And I found myself for the first time with a lot of free time. And I was always running to keep in shape at that point. I had started in my early 20s. And I think people just started to take running and use it as a platform to create social environments and to kind of give people something to do. At least that was my point of view. There was always the option to go out drinking and partying and do stuff like that in New York. But at night, if you didn't want to do that, you were kind of limited. And what I found after a couple years of doing OSR, was that this was another option for people that wanted to do something a little healthier, that were maybe hitting an age where going out every night wasn't the goal, but still wanted some kind of social interaction with like-minded people or people with common ground.
I think that's absolutely right. Even some of these larger groups, you would think that there's a social component to it, but a lot of times there isn't. A lot of times people will just show up, they'll do their run, and then they'll leave. Or for that matter, you're going to have just such varying degrees of ability that if you want to run with other people, let's say, it's difficult because you're either too fast, too slow, or somewhere in between the groups. It's really hard to get that camaraderie together.
Yeah, during the run, the way we approach these group runs is a slightly different approach than what was kind of the standard at the time. At the time, a lot of these groups did want to run together, at least these social groups, and it would be masses of people running together X amount of distance and kind of waiting for each other at different key points in the run. And when I had done that at the time, I was kind of only running threshold runs. And when I would go to these groups and have that experience of stop, go, I found that it wasn't conducive to avoiding injury for me and keeping my heart rate up and doing all these things that I was trying to do. So when I started OSR, certain things that I took from other groups and certain things I kept out from other groups kind of was to create this environment of a threshold run bookended by social interaction. So before the run, we have a half hour of meeting up and interaction. And then after the run, there's, as much time as you want to give to sitting down, having dinner with everybody that had just partaken in the same run. And even though you didn't run it together, you ran the same route. And from that, you could draw a lot of conversation about, how you handle different things, hills and distance and speed and such. And what that ended up doing, actually, I noticed, was giving a lot of people the benefit of each other's experiences as runners. So you find a lot of beginner runners growing faster than normal because they're talking to all these people with all this experience.
I kind of agree with that. I think there's, if you go to pretty much any race, everyone, the only conversation anyone is ever having after that race is how hard that race was. You know, and they're kind of spitting and coughing, and they're even in a kind of a complainy sort of tone, talking about this section was really hard or they should have done this better, but they're always doing it with a smile on their face. Yeah. And so I say that when you run, like the harder you run, this is a new thought that I'm kind of having right now. So like I say, the harder that you run, the better experience you have during that run, and therefore the more camaraderie you have with those people after that run. You kind of have this post run
elation, kind of.
But you share that with each other, as opposed to just like a little jaunt, especially by yourself, or even a jaunt with other people where you got it's kind of conversational, it's fun. It's like, all right, well, I'll see you guys later. Have a good day.
I think there's something that goes back to primal stuff. And,
yes.
And I think when we were nomadic tribes or whatever, we probably hunted together and ran down prey and did all that stuff. So there is a dynamic to running fast with people that I think taps into something cerebral. And I think the benefits of that come once the activity is finished, because the adrenaline is calmed down, everything is calmed down. And then you get hit by this tidal wave of, endorphins and positivity and sometimes emotional kind of response to what you had just done, And I think when there's somebody there to share it, you can't help but exchange energy based on what you had just accomplished.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that's actually part of the reason why running is there's a boom in running to begin with, is that everyone, for generations now, we've been kind of living this more or less sedentary lifestyle with a lot of things kind of being handed to us, and running is that it's kind of the anesthetized version of hunting, of that really hard labor where quote unquote survival is on the line. It's obviously survival isn't actually on the line, but I think physically it kind of feels like it. You feel like someone's chasing you down, or you're chasing somebody down, or you have to maintain this pace or something, where you have some sort of pressure on yourself to maintain this high level of output that mimics, I think, physically and even somewhat cerebrally, like a fight or flight mechanism. And like you said, at the end of it, you can then get together and share that experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing discovery, I think, that I made when I first started organizing Orchard Street Runners, because up until that point, I hadn't done much group running, certainly not at a threshold pace or any kind of real, push physically. So those first few nights where, especially in the fall, when it was just a little bit cooler out and you were pushing harder than you had all summer because you're just getting a better, oxygen exchange or whatever. Those nights where you're finding speed for the first time and you're keeping up with people in the group that you weren't able to keep up with 2 months ago, for whatever reason, whether it's confidence or physical growth, like those moments are inspiring in ways that I think transcend running. It becomes about community, it becomes about camaraderie, it becomes about, again, the shared experience of pain, and I think, humans have obviously evolved to the point of comfort in which a lot of the things we needed to do to survive are no longer necessary, but we're still engineered for them. So when we get to flex those muscles, I think there's a gratification that we give ourselves that makes us more exceptional, say, than the person that doesn't move.
You just said everything I was trying to say, but much better.
I've had some practice.
Much more eloquently. So let's tie that back then. So why do you think there is a relationship between, I ask all of my guests about pain and their relationship with pain. Do you think there is a relationship between pain, that seeking of pain, and these unsanctioned events, these kind of, low-key, smaller participant events? Do you think there's a relationship there?
I do. I think that with a smaller event, somebody like myself who's kind of behind the helm designing these events for these athletes, I know my athletes really well. I know their skill level, I know their fitness level, I know what they're there for. And, we've become kind of known for delivering these events that are not better, but just different. And we can focus on a specific type of runner as a result of our limited field size. Whereas, these mass start events have to appeal to many people to pay for the permits, to pay for all the Gatorade and all the resources that they have in place for the runners. What we do is we scale everything down to the point where we don't necessarily need a sponsor to execute. A sponsor adds additional resources, which we dictate based on this smaller group of people. But when you have mass starts, you have to make so many people happy. There's no real identity there because of the wash of people you have to accommodate. With me, I can focus on these local kind of elite level runners and cater to every little aspect of their experience to give them something dynamic and unique that nobody else really can at this point. I mean, with the level of experience that we have now executing our type of events, I just think it would be very difficult for somebody to come in and deliver that same quality experience in this type of run, But I feel like we inspire people, and people are off doing their own things now. And as things grow around us, it's going to be really interesting to see how people evolve these ideas.
So do you have time standards for people that register for your events, or is that just kind of self-selecting?
As of late, I've been hand selecting my fields because I'm casting a show, really. Like, I want to create a very, very specific, almost like a very specific entertainment for the rest of the community that isn't running. It's like this unwritten agreement where the people that compete in my events know that they're being casted in this battle royale kind of environment where it's everybody for themselves. Everybody's going to go 150%. And because our races are engineered to be choose your own route, speed isn't the only factor in determining the winner. So now all these people that are fast but know there's someone's faster in the field, they don't have that lack of desire to run because so-and-so is already registered. Now they know that anyone can win. I mean, an unknown can win. I mean, the midnight
unknowns have won.
Unknowns win all the time, and even the midnight half. Like, one of the most well-known stories of the midnight half is Jerry Faulkner, who is one of the most talented runners in New York, and he's the fastest person to lose the midnight half 3 times. And it's just and it's one of those endearing.
What a dubious honor.
Yeah, but but he's a badass, and he's out there. And every time that guy runs in a race of mine, you could just tell the look on his face that it is 120%, and that's what I get out of it. And that's why I keep doing this, because these people that come, they go all out, and to see them, flex like they do, it's just insane.
So let's talk a little bit about, in case my listeners don't know, let's talk a little bit about the format. So you say you're running, say, a 30-mile, or the midnight half, right? 13.1 miles. But you might cross that finish line having run less than 13.1 miles. Why is that?
Well, because what we decided to do, Dave Trimble and I, in 2012, was create a new type of format for the running world. And basically, we used his background in cycling as kind of like the inspiration. He was very familiar with alley cat style racing in New York City because of the bike messenger scene and all that. And when he took his approach to how we were going to do the midnight half, he was very intent on wanting to do a checkpoint driven race, and I was all for it because it sounded really cool and really interesting, and to my knowledge, had never been done before, at least to no scale, recognizable scale. So after the execution of the first one in 2012, everybody was very excited about it, and the format was the shining star. So we decided that, all right, we got something here. Dave then broke off and continued to work on his race, which is the Red Hook Criterium. But from that point forward, I was inspired by what we had done. And I started to try to figure out ways to create variations on what we did with the midnight half. And that's where the 10Ks came about. Also, to kind of give women a stage to be seen, because in doing the midnight half, we got to see a lot of really strong female athletes come out and perform stellar and kind of get overshadowed by the men's performances. So because I had this kind of this mental approach to everything where I could do anything is possible. Once I executed that first race, it really just broke down all these barriers of, I don't know if this will work, this or that. And I just said, screw it. I'm just gonna go out there and put this out to the world and see if anybody shows up. And that's how I basically did the first few races, just kind of hope for the best. But somehow they made enough noise that people heard them. And through a little bit of persistence, they started to pick up.
I can tell you for a fact I heard about them. Years ago. I started hearing about this like midnight half marathon. I'm like, that's actually sounds kind of cool. And I've never done it. I've never been around it, but I hear people talking about it constantly. It does create that buzz.
That's really cool to hear because, I don't get to hear too much feedback aside from the people that I see on Tuesday nights and such. But having somebody like you that I've never physically met in person before say that you heard about something I did 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Is super, super complimentary. So
yeah,
I appreciate that.
I think stuff like that gets more of a buzz than you would imagine. But you also seem to live your life with that, kind of by that like Steve Jobs quote, once you realize that everything in life was made by people no smarter than you, it opens up like a world of possibilities.
There's a lot of truth to that. And in helping other people organize races, that's one of the things I say to them is nobody knows that you have no clue what you're doing. So as long as you go out there and act like there's no one there to tell you you're wrong because this hasn't been done before.
I think it's, I think you could, this is probably true of every age. I think when I was 25 years old, I used to look at 35 years old and think that they had their shit together. But now that I'm 35 years old, I realize they do not.
No.
I look at 45-year-olds as if maybe they have their shit together. But the answer is they probably don't either.
I'm hitting 40. Well, I hit 41, so I would say no. I wish I was one of those 40-year-olds that had their shit together. But, that's been one of the byproducts of doing this. This was something I did on the side. This was something that was just for fun. And it's, it was always my dream, like most people, I'm sure, to do what they love for a living. So in seeing opportunities to do that with OSR, I've had to make some sacrifices in my personal life to accommodate that, So I used to be an architect, and instead of having that, steady paycheck with benefits and vacation time, now it's like a 24/7 operation, and there really is no ability to walk away from it and have it still survive. It's still dependent on my constant energy and attention. So
yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that. I ask a lot of people about sacrifice, and usually I'm asking it in terms of what have you sacrificed to be able to run blah 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 marathon? What have you sacrificed to be able to do an Ironman? Whatever it is. What have you sacrificed? And do you think that, these are two separate questions, but do you think there's also a danger in making your hobby, making the thing that you love, making your livelihood dependent on that? Do you think there's a danger in falling out of love with that?
I think so. And I think it's about how long you're willing to hold on to this idea you have. And for me, OSR, there's been a lot of temptation over the years to sacrifice its integrity for the sake of working with a partner and yielding an income and all these other things. And I tried it at certain points in this timeline to be more accommodating to a brand or to to some other thing. And what I found is my gut screams when I do that, and it's become my compass. And with OSR, because I really in essence, I really don't have any clue what I'm doing. It's all been a process of figuring it out as I go. My gut has been the thing that I listen to exclusively, just because, it will punish me the most if I don't do what it tells me to. And that comes in the form of anxiety and stress.
Okay. So another question I ask a lot of my guests along the same lines is about pain. What is it? How do you deal with pain? How do you handle pain? So I'm going to amend the question slightly here and say, how do you deal with the stress and the anxiety, which is its own form of pain? How do you deal with the uncertainty? Because I think a lot of people don't.
It's a bit of a risk. It's like walking a tightrope at times, because you have this thing underneath you holding you up, but at any moment you could slip, and not to sound dramatic, but, I've sacrificed my architectural career and the last 10 years, devoting it towards making this thing OSR happen. And it's because I have this belief inside of me that not that it's going to make me rich, but that when I look back on my deathbed, I will have no regrets because I pursued this as to the fullest that I could. Had I looked back on my deathbed and said, well, I was miserable as an architect for 30 years, but hey, I did that, I don't think I would be as gratified. So with the sacrifice in the day-to-day, my personal life, finances, like things like this, things that people count on at this point in their life, I'm sacrificing them because I have this belief in what I'm doing, and I see the reaction in the community of people that partake in it, and that's worth more to me than money at this point. Even though money is great and making a living is obviously the goal, but right now if there's other gratification coming from this.
All right. Well, let's segue into the business side of these unsanctioned events. You mentioned that you had eliminated the midnight half as of 2016, which had to do sort of with financial reasons. Can you talk a little bit about that and a little bit about just the business side of these unsanctioned events? Is there a business model? What is the business model? And how can one make that profitable? Or is this more of a passion project?
I think in order for it to be successful, it has to be approached as a passion project. It has to be approached as something done for fun. If you're measuring success,
I think that's true about most things in life. You just have to kind of go about it in this, you
Yeah.
have to go about it with your heart, and hopefully everything else works out.
One of my mentors was an older cousin of mine, and he told me early on, find your passion, do what you love, the money will come. And at first I went with architecture because I convinced myself I was going to be the next Frank Lloyd Wright. I knew I had something inside me that I wanted to share with people. I felt it at a young age, and you think, oh, this is just some byproduct of some Disney movie influence or something. But in my back of my head, I always felt that there was something I wanted to do I just didn't see the point of living a normal life. To each his own. And for me, to go to an office every day and just waste away behind a desk, it just didn't make sense to me. And I always wanted to create something out of nothing and make that my thing. And I remember moving to Lower East Side in 2008 and seeing people doing that, Curtis Kalung, who does Love Me, other people that just, they create a brand or they create an idea out of thin air and just pursue the shit out of it. And then all of a sudden it becomes their identifiable characteristic. It becomes the way they make their living. It becomes something that at times makes somebody famous. And fame isn't my goal, but this idea of creating something out of thin air and making it tangible, that was kind of what I was pursuing. And I didn't know what form that would come in. I started running in my early 20s to lose weight. As an architect, I would run at night. And then when I got laid off, I started bartending. And it was through bartending that I created a network of friends locally. And they would see me running. And then they wanted to be a runner too, because they thought, well, this is a nice way to balance lifestyle with health.
You had mentioned that you kind of took a step back from the unsanctioned races, specifically the midnight half, for about a year.
Well, yeah, I had been doing some work with a major brand as a consultant, essentially. Through what I had built with OSR, I had met some people, and they brought me in behind the scenes to help design product and help design events. And that was, a consulting contract for 12 months. And there was a lot of growth in that relationship over the few years that I worked with them, to the point where, I'd been offered a 2-year contract for a significant amount of money. And what I felt at that point was that I wanted to get out of the situation because I didn't like the direction that things were going in with my relationship with them. So I pulled back, and in doing so was trying to create the opportunity for new things to happen. And ending the midnight half in 2016 was kind of an extension of that idea. People were starting to find ways to benefit themselves from being in my events, being in my photos, being on my Instagram. And it was starting to be a kick in the ass because people that were directly involved in what I was doing were not making money. Yet these other people were finding ways to kind of hack what we were doing and find ways to benefit themselves from it. And I didn't think that was justified or fair. And, also at the time, a lot of different brands and a lot of different running groups and individuals started to do their versions of the unsanctioned race, aka, the midnight half as inspiration. So with all this going on around us, we just kind of said, we're sitting on top with this race. This race is everybody's kind of like iconic New York City experience. And we had so much success, and no one had gotten hurt at that point, because the liability was another big issue of this, that we decided, let's just end it now while everybody still loves it. And that it's like this amazing experience that a certain amount of people were able to have early on. But now that this thing has boomed, let it be this thing that people talk about.
Yeah.
And create an opportunity to bring it back at the right time.
Like Seinfeld, walking away when you're on top.
I mean, I hope our last episode was better than theirs, but similar approach.
Right. Well, you mentioned the liability. Like, has anybody gotten hurt in these? I mean, these, again, just to get back into the format of the races again, there's no street closures, right? So it's unsanctioned. There's no police out. There's no police presence. You're starting at, let's say, the bottom of the Manhattan Bridge, and you're running to the next checkpoint, which means you're running through streets.
Yes.
You're passing. You're probably burning through some red lights. You're running.
Runners have done a lot of crazy things, and as people get more proficient in cutting the course, sometimes the risk level goes up. But yeah, these races are happening in the streets, through traffic, over bridges, pedestrians, bicyclists, the whole nine.
And they're running fast times.
They're running some of the men's races, the opening miles have been ran at 4:50, 4:40, 4:45. But they average out to be like 5:15 a mile.
That's pretty quick.
The ladies are 5:45, 6-minute miles, depending on the distance. And
that's fast.
You're talking about, people in the Olympic trials. You're talking about people that are accomplishing serious things in running outside of the unsanctioned world, in the legit world.
Caitlin Phillips, 2:37 marathon in Berlin this year.
I mean, Caitlin Phillips is a prime example of somebody coming from an elite level of competition into this race. And, her first midnight half, I think, was 2016, which she won. And she got lost 5 times. So just to show you that how fast she's running, her route wasn't the most efficient, and she still managed to pull it off. But I mean, the next person in line was, I think, Carly Gill came in second that year, who is nothing to sneeze at either. Another extremely competitive runner. And now, you got Leanne Sherrick, you got Jean Mack, you got Caitlin. There's just a handful of girls now that come out for these events that are ripping it apart, and in a certain type of event could beat the men.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, so one of the things I love most about this is the fact that it's very New York City, in the sense that, one, it's unsanctioned. It's kind of like a throwback to date, like old New York City, where just kind of there were no rules.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of you out there are from New York City, but I'm from Brooklyn. Joe here is from Queens. New York City's changed a lot in just our lifetimes.
Well, I'm sure you remember as a kid, crazy things happening. That time they inflated that giant balloon of King Kong on the Empire State Building. Yeah. Just stuff. There used to be stuff that people would do. I mean, I know that was sanctioned, but people used to use the city in ways to do things for themselves or for communities of people that, the city never intended and certainly wouldn't want you to do. But because you find these like cracks and crevices, like the guy that walked the high wire from one World Trade to the other, you just pull these things off because that's what, the city's here, and that was New York.
Yeah. But so again, just so these unsanctioned races is kind of like a throwback to old New York, but you also have to understand New York. You have to understand how to run in and out of traffic. You have to understand the routes. You have to understand the roads. I mean, you have to have this the course memorized. You have to, prior to going into it, you have to be able to figure out the shortest possible way to get from one checkpoint to another, to another, to another.
That's when we tell you the course. The bread route race, we gave them the start point 5 hours before the race, and we gave them the finish line at the start line. So, having just an understanding of the city is a definite must. And these races are engineered for those that train in the city, those that go out on their own and run their 80 to 100 miles a week, finding their own way from, one place to another. And then, you come to these races and you say, all right, the lay of the land has to be a general knowledge you have, because there are so many variables that we throw into the mix that, you may have a plan coming into the midnight half, but then we reverse the route on you. So you have to understand it more than just know it.
Yeah, that's true. So how do you think that the midnight half, let's say, in New York City is fundamentally different than, let's say, a midnight half that you put on in Chicago or LA?
I would assume so. But I've obviously never done one outside of New York. But just given the infrastructure of New York City, the ability to go from Brooklyn to Manhattan via bridge and have multiple options, the ability to have a grid system versus a radial system, like these are all elements that would change people's approach to how they handle an unknown course or a course of checkpoints. So I think innately it's always going to be different and take on the character of that particular environment or city.
All right, so along similar lines, I've heard you say that running a marathon can change your life. I mean, it can teach you something about hard work and how to do something when it's very, very difficult. Do you think there's a similar a similar feeling after, say, the OSR 30? Or do you think it's different or worse or better or...
From my experience in like interaction with people that have ran my events, a lot of people that these days anyway, a lot of people now perceive my events as a goal race, that they're not fast enough to get in, that they wouldn't be selected, but they would love to do it. And I've, over the last year, I've let a couple people in that were kind of on the cusp, and given them that opportunity to have that experience. And I'm very glad I did, because, you know, the people that come in, I mean, coming in last at one of my events has taken on its own life, like, because it's a small field and everybody's there watching everybody finish. By the time that last place person comes in, everybody is so in that zone of camaraderie that you were talking about, because now you've got the entire field at the finish line talking about it, and here comes the last person. So those people go completely crazy. And that last place person, I think, has one of the most unique experiences in running.
What's the differential between first and last generally?
Generally, I mean, if we took the men's 10K this past August as an example, I think between first and last was almost, I want to say 30 minutes, 40 minutes.
That's significant in a 10K.
In a 10K. But in the future, you know, I may have to actually break that up, because in terms of logistical execution of that particular event, having that long of a finish line was extremely difficult. Yeah.
All right. How about the 30, the OSR 30?
The 30 miler, I think, is a very good entry level ultra for people that want to break 26.2. You know, it's very local. It has a late start time. It starts at noon, so people can take their time in the morning, have their normal morning, routine, and then early afternoon make their way to the Lower East Side, and, you know, have a catered experience, you know, for that event in particular, because it usually is a very small field of runners and such a big distance. We try to get them very well fed prior and after to the event, and, you know, create a very comfortable environment for them to prepare and to recover in. But the event itself, I think it attracts a lot of fast marathoners locally that maybe haven't done an ultra.
Yeah. Okay. How about... There's kind of a rift, I would say, in the community between the unsanctioned versus the sanctioned. You know, do you think that there is any love lost between the people that focus on, say, New York City Marathon versus people that focus on, say, Midnight Half? Do you think there's some crossover?
I think there's a lot of everything. I think, you know, every time I post race finish times, there's a legitimate gripe from people outside of this community that sit there and say, that's not a real 10K, that's not a real half marathon. And they're 100% accurate. The people inside understand that too. Nobody's kidding themselves. But when we brag about our race times as finishers in this unsanctioned scene, it's kind of limited to the context of other runners that have done these events. We're not trying to say so-and-so ran a 28-minute 10K. They ran a 28-minute OSR 10K. And what that takes into account is this choosing your own route, and the shorter the distance, just as good as the faster the time, you know? So that becomes another element worth rewarding.
It's kind of like, it's almost more akin to cross country. I mean, cross country, there's set distances, but I think if you're out there wearing a GPS, I don't know, I think you're going to get something a little different than what they said it's going to be.
Well, you know, it's just if you don't want to play the game, you don't have to.
Right, exactly.
You know, and it's everybody's choice to do so or not. And
I think there's a little bit of an elitist attitude on both sides, saying, you know, like I would never run the New York City Marathon. I'm only going to do these unsanctioned smaller events, versus, you know, why would you ever do an unsanctioned event? It's different distances, you know, it's not the right thing. How you're never going to get your half marathon PR that way, you know.
I will say this though. A lot of the guys in the past that have that I know have not been fans of what we have done, when they've seen it, I would say 100% of them changed their point of view. And I'm not saying it wouldn't happen in the reverse.
I think it does happen. I think you do still see a lot of those people at the starting line of a lot of New York Road.
Yeah, I mean, so everybody has they want to choose their crew or their team or their gang, you know, and that's what options are all about.
Just enjoy both.
Yeah, and just realize everything is different, not better than something else, you know.
All right. All right. So let's look into the future. So what's next for OSR? What's your next event? What's your planned future event that no one knows about yet?
Actually, I kind of do. I really do everything on the fly. for example, the bread route race was a byproduct of A, wanting to do that particular race for a very long time, but B, also being bored in that moment in time and saying, I want to do something, And that's the beauty of what we have going. It's like I put registration out at 8 p.m. on a Monday without any warning for the bread route race. And by Tuesday at 8 p.m., there were 50 people registered.
Really?
So it's just this ability to execute on the fly. Like, I feel like that's very current too in all facets of culture, is like the ability to come up with an idea and execute instantly. And a lot of the times the things that I execute are a byproduct of my finger on the pulse of the community and knowing, so much about what's going on just because I'm involved in it, and being able to say, oh, this would fit in really well right here. Right before the marathon, this race would fit in at this distance, and we could probably get a certain amount of people to do it, So as time passes and as this ocean just kind of creates these different waves, I just try to jump in at the right time and execute.
Yeah. Like you said, there's a lot of the whole world of running. It keeps just getting bigger. There's a lot more, podcasts, let's say. There's a lot more events. There's a lot more people trying to make their way through this world. And I'd say, if you can open up registration on a, Saturday, and
Monday.
The race was on a Monday, and the race was on Saturday or whatever
Thursday.
it was, Thursday, in 3-4 days, whatever that is, you have a pretty good hold on what you're doing.
I'm very fortunate because, we've had a very high success rate, and every event we've done has been a success in at least some regards, especially in growth of awareness in the running community. And it's just an easy sell, I think, when you sit there and you describe to somebody a race that happens at night in traffic, no route, it just creates this like excitement from being a kid almost, where you're playing tag, like you were saying. You get this thrill of it, and I think that's because it's at night versus daytime. There's something about running in the city at night that it doesn't feel wrong, perhaps, but it just feels like you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. And I find excess energy at night that I don't have seemingly during the day. That's
another question I've asked a lot of people. Actually, I threw it up on my Instagram once. Like, do you prefer running in the morning or at night? And obviously people have their own opinions on that, but I'm definitely a night guy. I just love running at night.
I mean, as I'm getting older, I find myself getting more tired earlier, and that running at night becomes less attractive until I get out and I do it. And then I sit there and I'm like, this is just the way it's supposed to be.
As I get older, I find waking up loose and limber
harder. Which I think that was always my perspective, which is why I was like, I'd rather have the whole day to loosen up doing my day and then go run.
Exactly. So the end of your races, let's say, everyone is now crossed the finish line. What is your feeling having put together this event? Like, you brought this community of people together. You can do you take that moment where you're, everyone's in the bar, they're drinking, they're having fun, they're talking, they're sharing their war stories from the race. Do you ever sit back and watch them and think, like, man, I did this. Like, I created this event. I put all these people together. These people never would have been in the same room had I not done this. And this is a really gratifying feeling. Also, do I feel like, thank God everyone got across and they're safe and they're healthy? And
more the latter. Yeah, more the latter. Because going into it at this point, it's very stressful for me. And with something like the bread route race, which hadn't been done before, there's an additional stress to visualizing the start line, visualizing the execution of the finish line, and, hoping we get away with it and that some stupid monkey wrench doesn't get thrown in the process. But it's really this thankfulness that everybody got back okay, and that there are smiles on people's faces, and that, everybody had a good time in some way, including the volunteers. And it's a very gratifying thing to put together an event. Yes, that even the people helping walk out of it feeling like they did something that they're happy about and proud of, like sharing the ownership of these events with the volunteers is very important. With my photographers are, a major component to the success of OSR and to every event we've done. And just to have all these people contribute their talent and energy so willingly and so many times, like some of these guys and girls have helped me, for 5, 6 years, 7 years. It's amazing, So there is a gratification in that for sure.
That's pretty cool. As somebody who's been the race director for these some like relatively larger events, multi-100 person events, people come and go, and you don't even get to see them. You'll see pictures later. It's like I don't even remember seeing that person at the race. Somebody dressed up in a costume or something like that.
Yeah.
So you kind of lose a little bit of the individual touch, which is unfortunate. And then you think about a New York Roadrunner, where you have 50,000 people running the New York City Marathon. And again, not to discredit the New York City Marathon, because that's was a pivotal link in my chain that got me to where I am today.
I mean, I'm doing it next week, so
I was supposed to.
No kidding.
I hurt my back.
Oh,
I'm out.
sucks.
I'm out. I was fine with it until like fucking today. And now everyone's Instagram posts are all about the marathon, and I'm thinking, all right, maybe I should do it.
It's another wave that you just can't help but want to jump on at the time it comes, because it's just so much fun. Everything is so much fun around this weekend.
I'll tell you what, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but as I was thinking, man, like I really want to be running this New York City Marathon, I'm now also thinking maybe I should pick something beyond the New York City Marathon, and I know this OSR 30 is coming up.
Yeah, I'm actually really looking forward to this year's version of that race, because every year has been a significant amount of growth, period. But this year in particular, and it was kind of ignited by the OSR 30 last year. Travis Hawkins, who won last year, he had beaten out two-time champ Eric Reitinger, who came
Eric Reitinger was my old roommate.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
Eric, what's up?
What's up, Eric?
But having this level of competition that they're start with these guys, and I think the repercussions of the last 2 years of that race are going to really benefit this year's version. I think there's just going to be a lot of interest in it. I think there's going to be a lot of competition, and I think we're going to have a really good race this year, because I think there'll be strong females coming. Olivia O'Neill, who kind of like broke the barrier for women, she won again last year, a 45-minute PR on her previous year's time. But her skill level is increasing, and the level of competition. Molly Shiroishi is another girl coming up in the OSR 30 who came in second last year. I just think this year is going to be about the girls in the OSR 30, and I'm really excited about that, for the first time that we're going to have a strong female presence.
All right, so tell everyone when is the race? Tell if they're looking to get involved, or if they're just looking to spectate, where and how can they do that?
Right now, the race date isn't set. But it's going to be the end of March. I have another event in that time period, and I usually have to work out the exact date for both in relation to each other, which is this auction I do. But figure end of March, end of March, I would say. But I'll start putting information out probably a month and a half, 2 months prior, and start getting more specific as we get closer to the date. But it's all a process, and following my Instagram, Orchard Street Runners, is probably the best way to stay current, just because maintaining all these different facets of communication becomes really mundane for me. So I try to focus on Instagram.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, it's just
there's so many avenues that you could possibly go down. You just have to pick one or two, and maybe that's your thing.
Well, and in every race registration, there is a process of elimination I employ in vetting the competitors, and I don't hand anybody anything, and that's a big part of it. If you can't figure out how to register, no judgment on you, but then this race isn't for you. You got to be able to follow instructions.
You have to want to register.
You got to want it
and look for it.
Yeah, you got to take it with a grain of salt, because it is a small scale production. So it's not for everybody by any means, and there is no hard feelings if this race isn't for you. But I think as the years have passed, judging the growth, this is the breakthrough year for the OSR 30. There's no doubt in my mind that the level of competition is going to be ridiculous.
That's awesome and intimidating. Makes me not want to do it now.
I think you should absolutely do it. If you don't do it, I'm going to take it personally now.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, no, that sounds pretty cool. I'm registered for Boston, so it's probably not the best thing to be doing at the end of March. Right?
We had a guy last year. He ran the OSR 30, came in third. Jordan O'Donoghue ran an amazing race. I think he was under 3 hours. And then he went and ran London and then Boston, both at around 2:45.
Wow.
Kid is a tank.
Wow.
Yeah. So
how old is he?
Probably 26. I don't even know.
So he still doesn't crack in half every time?
No, yeah, he's definitely not my age, I'll tell you that. No, but he's extremely strong. Yeah, but just people doing amazing things, man, left and right.
I look at people that do stuff like that, and I It's just amazing.
It is that to me is amazing. 2:45 at Boston and London after that 30.
The consecutive weekends, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it was 3 weeks in a row, or it was 2 weeks after the 30, and then 1 week after.
Still, if I do a 30, let's say, I'm not saying I can't run a marathon within 2 or 3 weeks after that. It's gonna be affected. If I run 30 miles, I'm going to run that marathon slower, and I'm probably going to get hurt while doing it.
Yeah.
But not guaranteed, but maybe.
I think his last marathon out of the 3 was the fastest. And he was going all out for all of them.
Yeah.
You know?
He wasn't
He
talking
definitely
to
wasn't
30.
holding back.
Especially when you break 3 hours for a 30-mile street race.
Yeah. No, I mean that is no joke too. And these guys during that race, it almost looks like there's some kind of like Photoshop going on into your vision, because the way how fast they move for how long with such minimal effort. It's like they glide that whole course. Travis and Eric, and even the guy that won the first one, this guy Jan Wench, like glide. Like it was luckily for Jan, it was a beautiful day for the first version of this race that he won, and it was just a gorgeous fucking day to run. 60 degrees, still some snow on the ground. It was like this obscure warm day, is sandwiched between the shit storm of storms of snow and stuff. So he got super lucky. Then what was it, 2016? It was miserable, 30 degrees, 40-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, it was horrible. 5 people ran it. And then last year, which, was an amazing turnout.
Leading into that run, a few weeks out, I actually went for a run with Travis. I was training for Boston. I was probably a little bit behind in my training, not exactly where I should have been, but I was going to go out for a 16-mile run. I said, all right, let's meet in Prospect Park. I'll meet you at Grand Army Plaza. He shows up having already run 6 miles. I was on mile 0. He was on 6.
Yeah.
And we
Travis.
then ran 16 miles together, and he was crushing me. Conversational pace, especially toward the end of it. I was just, he's like, I can't talk anymore. I'm working way too hard just trying to keep up with you right now. And he ran out. And he had a good 30-mile run.
It's funny because
didn't win.
He didn't?
This past year, no?
Travis won.
Travis did win.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought he didn't win.
No, he
I
did.
take that back. Sorry, Travis.
He won. But yeah, no, it's like, it's funny because you meet a lot of runners doing what we do, organizing events. And with that high number of meeting of people, you meet, exceptional people sometimes. And somebody like Travis and even somebody like Eric, and I'm sure yourself, I don't know you very well, but, their level of control of their training and their accuracy in what they do, for themselves, their obsessiveness. It's like they're a Picasso of training, It's like they have this talent to engineer their bodies. That's fucking crazy to me.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of putting it, because I think a lot of other people would put it like these fucking losers spend all their time running and
to each his
exercising.
own, man. Like, and the guy sitting behind the desk making $1 million probably looks at me and says, "What this guy's got to get his shit together."
He's
right.
Exactly.
He's right.
I like how you put that though, seriously, because I always say like fitness is like an experiment on yourself, and a lot of times you, especially over time, you start to know you've had 1,000 different control groups, right? And so you start to know, and you can take a class and know fitness, right? But you won't understand fitness. Kind of like you were saying, you can know the route to the midnight half, but you have to understand the route. Yeah. I think in order to fit like Eric and Travis in particular, they understand their bodies. They don't just know that this might be bad for you. They don't just understand that this muscle connects to this muscle. They understand how it works. They understand how it feels. They understand where the weaknesses are and what to do to correct them. It's an amazing thing to do. It's an amazing sense of self-awareness that most people will never attain.
Well, yeah, and probably because a lot of people would never take the time. The time required running or cycling or swimming to get that in-depth knowledge of yourself. I've done a bit of swimming in the past and like I'm saying, like obsessively swimming, and gotten to understand my body in a much different way from moving through water versus running, and I cycle, not to any real amount, but, I enjoy cycling, 60 mile, 70 mile rides. And definitely learn a lot about yourself you would never learn from the other two activities. So
I would agree with that. And then you add in like a muscular component to that, some sort of like weight training to that. And now that's just that fourth dimension of fitness that you now again you're getting that understanding. I think if you're just a pure runner, pure cyclist, pure just a little bit of background. Travis and Eric both come from a triathlete background.
Highly competitive.
Highly competitive. Yes, they're both very, very good. And so again, you have that 4-dimensional space of awareness.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a 5th and a 6th dimension there, but
I mean, the first time I remember a few years back running to the gym for the first time, and then swimming, and then running back home, and doing it in kind of a duathlon type of approach, like trying to minimal time in between each activity. And yeah, the layers of fatigue are different, and it was, I'm glad I did it because I understood something different that I hadn't before.
Yeah. I think it also allows you to gain more fitness without the damage and potential injury that, say, pure running does.
Yeah.
Like we were just talking, like Greg Larea, from some of your races, like he just, has a hip fracture right now.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Just from the pounding. He's not a big guy.
How do you break a hip like that? I mean, like I understand you fall from a roof, you break your hip, but subtle pounding from multiple steps, breaking your hip, to me, it's just a crazy concept.
Yeah. And then just you can gain the fitness through biking and swimming that you just can't with pure running, just because your body, just the pounding, it's limiting.
God, the level of fitness, I mean, through the Trimble connection, a lot of bike messengers and cyclists would come to OSR and run, and just seeing their level of fitness, I mean, a lot of them not running ever before, and then maintaining 6-minute paces for 8 miles with some of the guys in the group. You sit there and you're like, holy shit, this really translates. And it kind of piqued my curiosity of getting into cycling to benefit my running. And that's kind of what initiated me buying a real road bike finally.
I tell the story all the time, but I took 17 minutes off my marathon time when I started training for triathlon for real.
Wow.
When I finally got into biking 4 to 5 days a week consistently, and 17 minutes from 2011 to 2012.
I see. It's just people that are afraid to introduce new stress to themselves physically. There's no growth ability. You really have to find these things that you haven't done before when you hit 35, 40 years old, and it kind of inspires curiosity and interest just in the fact that it's a different activity, and covering ground for me was a big thing with cycling versus running. It's like running versus walking. Run the Manhattan Bridge versus walk the Manhattan Bridge. The shit is so slow and boring when you walk.
Yeah.
So then cycling was dope because you can cover 50, 60 miles a clip instead of just 10 or 15.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, it's its own little adventure.
Yeah.
I think my next foray is going to be like rock climbing.
Oh, I just saw Free Solo yesterday.
People keep talking about it. I have to check it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome, and and you can draw a lot of inspiration from the storyline, and you can relate a lot, even though what we do doesn't necessarily mean life or death. These races, these unsanctioned races, it's a little closer to that than these sanctioned races where roads are closed and stuff. Not that that's a good thing, right. But it adds an element of excitement and experience.
Yeah, danger in an undangerous world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, New York now, right? Like
bubble wrapped.
Still very dangerous, but. Definitely not the New York of the 1990s.
Right. Yeah. The murder rate in the 1990s was 3,000 or 3,000 people a year. That's 10 a day.
That's crazy.
10 people murdered a day.
Murdered, not even killed.
Not
dying.
Right.
Murdered.
Yeah, murdered. To say nothing of like all the other forms of violent crime that was happening on a daily basis. That's just pure murder.
Or manslaughter, per se.
I guess.
Like
yeah.
God knows,
I think
voluntary manslaughter. Fair enough.
Right. Exactly. All right, well, this is getting off. This is ending on a fairly dark note. Yeah. So I think, Joe and I are just reminiscing about days of old. But yeah, Joe, thank you very much for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation. The GoPro just died, so that was a perfect timing for that. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. We're really looking forward to your next events and what you're doing in the future, because I know it's going to be something fun and something interesting.
I can't thank you enough for your interest in even having a conversation, but it's great to meet you and to be a part of this.
I don't speak with people that I don't actually want to speak with, kind of like what you were saying. If it's not a conversation that I want to have, I'm not going to have it.
Yeah.
So you obviously have been somebody that I've heard about for a long time now. I definitely wanted to reach out to you and kind of pick your brain and see what your story was.
I'm glad we got to do it because it's been a lot of fun.
All right, good. So Joe, thanks again. And for all you out there listening, check out Joe at Orchard Street Runners on Instagram, and check us out, Personal Record Podcast on Instagram and everywhere else. And we'll see you next time.